My name is Dave Chapman. I'm a neuropharmacologist with 20 years of industry experience in medical affairs and about a half-decade in preclinical research in animal models of seizures and epilepsy. And today I'd like to focus on a group of overlapping conditions to Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, those of developmental and epileptic encephalopathies, or DEEs. Over 800 different, largely monogenic gene mutations that have a primary clinical consequence, seizures and developmental plateauing or regression. Furthermore, we'll briefly discuss the story still being written about Bexicaserin, which is an investigational therapy for the treatment of countable motor seizures associated with developmental and epileptic encephalopathy. Very briefly, Lundbeck is a global biopharmaceutical company dedicated to transforming lives through advancing brain health. Our global headquarters is located in Copenhagen, and our U.S. presence is just outside of Chicago. We are one of the only long-standing pharmaceutical companies in the world focusing exclusively on brain diseases. Our legacy in neurological rare started with one of the first treatments for the treatment of seizures associated with LGS. This medicine is clobazam, trade name Onfi, and we certainly hope to build upon that legacy. What are developmental and epileptic encephalopathies? They are a constellation of conditions that are brought about by myriad reasons, whether genetic, structural, metabolic, or synaptopathic. The underlying phenomenon which binds patients with DEEs together is difficult to control seizures and neurodevelopmental delay. The primary item I wish to cover in this slide is that DEE is an umbrella term, meaning that, as stated previously, many different pathways converge to produce a similar clinical picture. DEE has its own diagnosis code, or ICD-10 code. As treatments and services become more widely available for patients with DEE, this becomes more relevant due to increased access to specialists, research, and support, and provides a larger community of patients and caregivers with shared experiences. In this way, the LGS community is in a favorable position, having a clear path forward to treatment centers of excellence and community for shared experience. I would now like to introduce you to Bexicaserin. So Bexicaserin is an investigational medication and is not approved by the US FDA or any other regulatory agency. The safety and efficacy of Bexicaserin has not yet been established. That said, Bexicaserin does act on a specific subtype of serotonin receptors, the 5-HT2C receptor. So we previously heard about 5-HT2 receptors. There are over 14 different types of serotonin receptors, and this Bexicaserin acts on one of those, the 5-HT2C receptor. We'll discuss that mechanism in greater detail on the next slide, but the placement of this receptor highlights a converging pathway by which the imbalance between excitatory and inhibitory neurotransmission in seizure activity can be restored to more normal levels. 5-HT2C receptors are found both on inhibitory interneurons, shown on this slide in green, as well as excitatory neurons, shown on this slide in tan. The impact of Bexicaserin on the inhibitory neurons, so again, seizures are the result of an imbalance between inhibition and excitation. The strategies that you can do to try and reestablish that balance are either traditionally have been to decrease overexcitation or to increase underinhibition. And mechanism on the inhibitory side, so again, those neurons shown in green when Bexicaserin binds to 5-HT2C receptors, it increases the inhibition. So you're applying a greater amount of brakes to try and normalize the imbalance between inhibitory and excitatory neurotransmission. On the excitatory side, conversely, interaction of Bexicaserin with 5-HT2C receptors results in a decrease of these excitatory neurons. So there is a dual mechanism of action by which Bexicaserin both increases inhibition and decreases overexcitation. So let's look briefly at the data that we have generated to date with bexicaserin in patients with developmental and epileptic encephalopathies. In this study, patients were divided into two groups, those on a stable regimen of ASMs or anti-seizure medications, to which either placebo or bexicaserin was added. Following 75 days of treatment, all patients who were still in the trial and desired to do so were transitioned to bexicaserin in an open-label extension. During the double-blind placebo-controlled portion of the study, which is shown here in the gray first section of our graph, we saw numerically greater reductions in seizure frequency compared to baseline in patients treated with bexicaserin versus those treated with placebo. Furthermore, upon conversion of all patients to bexicaserin, so that is shown in the clear bars looking at OLE month through 1 through month 12, we see that all patients had numerically greater reduction in their seizure frequency versus baseline, and that this effect was sustained as long as we have looked, in this case out to 12 months. The side effects that were seen that occurred in a greater percent of patients who received bexicaserin versus those who received placebo were mainly CNS or GI related. And this was further confirmed in the open label extension period, when the take home from a safety perspective is that there were no additional adverse events seen during this longer period of treatment. Where we are in terms of, to provide the latest update, bexicaserin is in phase 3 in clinical trial development, which is the final step prior to submission of our data set to FDA. One of our phase 3 trials includes about half of its patient cohort having patients with Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. This allows not only for new data in the LGS community, but also paves the way for literally hundreds of other rare or ultra-rare developmental and epileptic encephalopathies that to date have no approved treatments or data for a pathway of care. This is just my way of saying we are at this meeting. Please just look for the starfish in terms of where you will find our booth. The email uspatientadvocacy@lundbeck.com can put you in contact with someone to address any questions that you have. And lastly, I just want to have my contact information up here. Please reach out if you have any questions, either about the data that I've presented today or the studies that we are doing with bexicaserin. I just want to make sure that everybody knows it's a pretty busy month. It's Patient Advocacy Month, and it's one of my favorite months of the year. As families and caregivers of patients with rare diseases, you really have superpowers. I met Tracy personally for the first time last year, and a decade or so ago before, I heard her speak of her journey in the addition of a PhD and figuring out that a calcium channel blocker, which really is OG personalized medicine, provided benefit for her daughter. I thought that one of Tracy's superpowers was capacity. Another superpower that many of you have is hope. We're grateful for the opportunity to work with your community, and it's our desire to share in this superpower of hope. Thank you for your trust and enthusiasm.